The crimson sun beat down mercilessly on the cracked surface of Pyrrhus 7, turning the already hellish landscape into a furnace that would melt most known metals. The planet's twin suns created temperatures that soared beyond 400 degrees during the day, while poisonous gases leaked from countless volcanic fissures across the barren wasteland. Nothing was supposed to live here. The Galactic Survey had marked it as a Class X death world decades ago, warning all civilized species to avoid it at all costs. But deep within a jagged cave system, something small and desperate clung to life. The baby dragon was no larger than a house cat, its once brilliant scales now dull and cracked from dehydration. Its tiny claws scraped weakly against the rocky floor as it tried to find a cooler spot, but even the deepest parts of the cave felt like an oven. The creature's breathing came in short, painful gasps, each breath burning its lungs with the sulfurous air that filled the caverns. 3 weeks had passed since its mother's death. 3 weeks of watching her massive form slowly succumb to the planet's hostile environment, her powerful body unable to generate enough energy to both keep herself alive and protect her offspring. The adult dragon had crash-landed on this nightmare world while fleeing from poachers who hunted her species for their precious scales and organs. She had been gravely wounded, her navigation systems damaged, leaving her no choice but to attempt an emergency landing on the nearest planet. Pyrrhus 7 had been that planet. The baby dragon remembered its mother's final moments clearly. She had used the last of her strength to breathe a protective shell of cooled metal around the cave entrance, sealing them both inside but also trapping them. Her final act had been to push her youngster toward the deepest part of the cave, where the temperatures were slightly more bearable, before her great heart finally stopped beating. Now the little creature was alone, slowly dying in the same terrible heat that had claimed its mother. Its internal temperature regulation systems, still underdeveloped due to its young age, could no longer cope with the extreme conditions. The protective scales that would one day make it nearly invulnerable were still soft and thin, offering little protection against the planet's harsh environment. Food had run out days ago. The emergency rations its mother had carried were long gone, and there was nothing edible in the cave system. Even water was scarce, reduced to tiny droplets that occasionally condensed on the cooler stone surfaces during the brief nighttime hours when temperatures dropped to merely scorching instead of instantly lethal. The baby dragon's sophisticated brain, capable of complex thought despite its youth, understood its situation with crystal clarity. It was going to die here, alone and forgotten, on a world that existed solely to destroy life. The irony wasn't lost on the young creature that its species, known throughout the galaxy for their incredible resilience and power, would end with such a pathetic whimper. But even as despair crept into its thoughts, the baby dragon refused to simply give up. Its species had survived for millions of years by being stubborn, by fighting against impossible odds, by never surrendering even when death seemed certain. So it continued to search for water droplets, continued to explore every inch of the cave system, continued to hope that somehow, someway, salvation might come. The cave system was larger than it had initially thought. Over the past 3 weeks, the baby dragon had discovered dozens of connecting tunnels and chambers, some leading deeper into the planet's crust where the heat became even more unbearable, others winding upward toward the surface where the poisonous atmosphere would kill it in minutes. Its mother had chosen their shelter well, finding the one spot in the entire cave network where the temperature was just barely within the range that could sustain dragon life, if only temporarily. In one of the deeper chambers, the baby dragon had made a disturbing discovery. Bones, lots of them. The skeletal remains of various creatures that had somehow found their way to this planet over the years, all of them now reduced to bleached white calcium deposits scattered across the cave floor. Some of the bones belonged to species the young dragon recognized from its genetic memory, others were completely alien. All of them told the same story. Pyrrhus 7 was where living things came to die. Among the bones, the baby dragon had found fragments of metal and plastic, the remains of crashed spacecraft and emergency shelters that had failed to protect their occupants from the planet's lethal environment. The sight had filled the young creature with a mixture of hope and dread. Hope, because it meant that others had tried to survive here, that rescue was at least theoretically possible. Dread, because all of those attempts had clearly ended in failure. The baby dragon's enhanced senses, designed to detect prey and predators across vast distances, could pick up no signs of life anywhere on the planet's surface. Its thermal vision showed only the endless heat radiating from the ground and air, broken occasionally by the even more intense heat signatures of active volcanic vents. Its electromagnetic sensors detected no artificial signals, no signs of technology or civilization. Pyrrhus 7 was truly dead, a monument to the universe's capacity for creating environments so hostile that even the hardiest life forms couldn't gain a foothold. As the young creature huddled in the deepest part of the cave, conserving what little energy remained in its failing body, it thought about the stories its mother had told it during their brief time together. Stories of the great dragon homeworlds, with their crystal cities and floating gardens. Stories of the ancient wars between dragons and other spacefaring species, battles fought across entire star systems. Stories of individual dragons who had performed impossible feats of heroism and cunning, becoming legends that were still told millions of years later. The baby dragon had been born during its mother's escape from the poachers, emerging from its protective shell just hours before the crash landing. It had never seen the dragon homeworlds, never experienced the joy of soaring through open space on its own wings, never known anything but fear and struggle and the constant presence of death. Its entire existence had been shaped by tragedy, and now it seemed destined to end in the same way. But even as its strength failed and its body began to shut down, the baby dragon continued to fight. When it became too weak to walk, it crawled. When it became too weak to crawl, it used its claws to pull itself along the cave floor. And when even that became impossible, it lay still and focused all of its remaining energy on simply breathing, on keeping its heart beating for just one more minute, one more second. The young dragon's last coherent thought, as consciousness began to slip away, was a wish that someone somewhere might remember that it had tried, that it had not given up, even when giving up would have been so much easier, that in its own small way it had lived up to the proud traditions of its species, even if no one would ever know. As the baby dragon slipped into what seemed like its final sleep, the cave around it remained as silent and lifeless as it had been for countless years. The heat continued its relentless assault, the poisonous gases continued to seep through the rock, and the twin suns continued their eternal dance across the blood-red sky. Pyrrhus 7 had claimed another victim, adding one more tragedy to its long list of casualties. But deep in the planet's upper atmosphere, something was stirring. A tiny metal object, no larger than a human fist, was falling through the toxic clouds, its heat shields glowing white-hot as it descended toward the surface. The object's primitive computer brain was following a pre-programmed search pattern, scanning the terrain below for signs of life or technology, broadcasting a weak signal that identified it as a human exploration probe. The probe had been launched from a survey ship in the outer system, part of humanity's ongoing efforts to catalog and study every world in their expanding sphere of influence. Most species considered such surveys pointless when applied to obvious death worlds like Pyrrhus 7, but humans had a peculiar habit of wanting to examine everything, even planets that offered nothing but death and destruction. As the probe descended through the lower atmosphere, its sensors began picking up traces of artificial materials scattered across the planet's surface. Metal fragments, polymer residues, and other signs that intelligent beings had once been here. The probe's programming immediately flagged these discoveries as significant, adjusting its descent trajectory to investigate the most promising locations. One of those locations was the cave system, where the baby dragon lay dying. The probe's mass spectrometer detected traces of dragon DNA in the air currents rising from the cave's genetic material that had been shed from the young creature's scales and carried upward by convection. The probe's computer didn't recognize the specific species, but it could tell that the genetic patterns indicated a highly intelligent life form, one that might still be alive somewhere in the cave network below. Following its programming, the probe began broadcasting an emergency signal, a call for immediate assistance that would reach the human survey ship in the outer system within hours. At the same time, it started descending toward the cave entrance, its sensors probing deeper into the rock formations, searching for any sign of the creature that had left its genetic signature in the planet's atmosphere. The baby dragon, lost in fevered dreams of its mother and the homeworld it would never see, remained unaware that help was finally coming. But even in its unconscious state, some primitive part of its brain detected the electromagnetic radiation from the probe's transmissions, and its failing heart beat just a little bit stronger, as if responding to the promise of rescue that hung in the superheated air. Commander Sarah Chen received the emergency signal while reviewing mineral surveys in the outer system. The probe's message was brief but urgent. Complex life signs detected on Pyrrhus 7, immediate investigation required. Most of her crew thought it was a malfunction. Nothing lived on death worlds like Pyrrhus 7. But Sarah had spent 15 years exploring the galaxy's most hostile environments, and she'd learned to trust her instruments even when logic said otherwise. "Prep the shuttle," she ordered her navigator, Lieutenant Torres. "Full environmental protection, emergency medical supplies, and anything else we might need for a search and rescue on a Class X world." Torres looked at her like she'd lost her mind. "Commander, with respect, that planet will kill us before we even reach the surface. The atmospheric composition alone would dissolve our shuttle's hull within hours." Sarah was already pulling on her environmental suit, checking the seals and power systems with practiced efficiency. At 42, she was one of the most experienced planetary surveyors in human space, a woman who had made her reputation by successfully exploring worlds that others deemed impossible. Her weathered face bore the scars of a dozen close calls, but her eyes still held the bright curiosity that had driven her to choose exploration over the safety of Earth-based assignments. "The probe detected dragon DNA," Sarah said, causing Torres to freeze in surprise. "Dragons are sentient beings, Lieutenant. If there's even a chance one of them is alive down there, we have a moral obligation to attempt a rescue." The shuttle launch took 2 hours to prepare. Sarah's team consisted of herself, Torres, and Dr. Marcus Webb, their xenobiologist and medical officer. The shuttle itself was a specialized exploration craft, designed to operate in the most hostile environments humanity had encountered. Its hull was composed of adaptive metamaterials that could withstand extreme temperatures and corrosive atmospheres, while its life support systems were rated for missions lasting up to 2 weeks in otherwise lethal conditions. As they descended through Pyrrhus 7's atmosphere, the shuttle's sensors painted a picture of absolute desolation. The planet's surface was a maze of cracked stone and active volcanic vents, with temperatures that would instantly vaporize most organic materials. Poisonous gases swirled in dense clouds, creating a perpetual twilight even during the day cycle when both suns were visible. "I'm reading the probe's location," Torres reported from the navigation station. "It's hovering over what looks like a cave system about 12 kilometers from the largest volcanic field. The probes detected multiple life sign echoes coming from inside the cave network." Dr. Webb looked up from his biological scanners with excitement. "Those readings are consistent with dragon physiology, but the signals are very weak. Whatever's down there, it's in serious distress." Sarah guided the shuttle to a landing site about half a kilometer from the cave entrance, the closest they dared approach given the unstable ground conditions. Even through the shuttle's advanced shielding, they could feel the brutal heat radiating from the planet's surface. The external temperature gauge showed readings that were well beyond the survival threshold for most known species. "Environmental suits to maximum protection," Sarah ordered as they prepared to disembark. "We'll have maybe 4 hours before our cooling systems start to fail, so we need to work fast." The walk to the cave entrance felt like crossing the surface of a star. Even with their suits' cooling systems running at full power, the heat was overwhelming. Sarah could feel sweat pouring down her face inside her helmet, and she knew that without their technological protection, they would have been dead within minutes. The ground beneath their feet was so hot that it glowed faintly, and they could see the air itself shimmering with thermal distortions. The cave entrance was partially sealed by what looked like melted metal, but Sarah's team quickly determined that it was actually dragon fire breath that had been shaped and cooled into a crude barrier. Someone or something had deliberately sealed this cave from the inside, which suggested intelligence and desperation in equal measure. "Thermal lance," Sarah called to Torres, who was carrying their cutting equipment. "We need to get through this barrier without compromising the cave's internal atmosphere." The cutting process took 20 precious minutes, but finally they had carved an opening large enough to crawl through. Sarah went first, her suit's lights cutting through the darkness of the cave interior. The temperature inside was still brutally hot, but it was survivable for someone with proper protection. The cave system was larger than their external scans had suggested, with multiple passages leading deeper into the planet's crust. Sarah's team split up to cover more ground, each following a different tunnel while maintaining constant radio contact. The probe's signals indicated that the life signs were coming from somewhere deep in the network, possibly hundreds of meters below the surface. Sarah took the central passage, following her suit's navigation system as it guided her toward the strongest biological readings. The walls around her were smooth basalt, worn by countless years of thermal expansion and contraction. Occasionally, she passed side chambers filled with the skeletal remains of various creatures, grim reminders of the planet's lethal nature. "Commander," Dr. Webb's voice crackled through her comm system, "I'm finding dragon scales scattered through several of these passages, large ones probably from an adult, but I'm also detecting much smaller scales, consistent with a juvenile specimen." "Keep looking," Sarah replied, pressing deeper into the cave system. "If there's a baby down here, it won't last much longer without help." The passage she was following began to slope downward more steeply, leading her into the deepest parts of the cave network. Her suit's thermal sensors were picking up a slight temperature gradient, with the air getting marginally cooler as she descended. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to make the difference between life and death for a creature adapted to survive in extreme conditions. Then she saw it. The baby dragon was curled in a small alcove at the end of the passage, its tiny form barely visible in the darkness. At first, Sarah thought she was looking at a pile of discarded scales, but then she noticed the faint rise and fall of breathing. The creature was alive, but barely. "Found it," Sarah whispered into her comm, approaching the dragon slowly and carefully. "Juvenile dragon appears to be unconscious but alive, initiating emergency medical protocols." The baby dragon was smaller than Sarah had expected, no bigger than a large house cat. Its scales, which should have been bright and lustrous, were dull and cracked from dehydration and heat stress. The creature's breathing was shallow and irregular, and its body temperature was dangerously low for its species, indicating that its internal regulation systems were failing. Sarah activated her suit's medical scanner, pointing it at the unconscious dragon. The readings were grim but not hopeless. Severe dehydration, malnutrition, and heat exhaustion, but no immediately life-threatening injuries. With proper care and treatment, the creature could survive. "Dr. Webb, I need you down here immediately," Sarah called. "Bring the portable medical unit and all of our hydration supplies." While she waited for the doctor to arrive, Sarah gently moved the baby dragon away from the rock wall and onto a thermal blanket she'd spread on the cave floor. The creature was surprisingly light, its bones hollow like those of a bird to enable flight when it reached maturity. She could feel its tiny heart beating rapidly against her gloved hands, fighting to keep the dragon alive despite its body's failing systems. Dr. Webb arrived within minutes, carrying a compact medical kit designed for treating injured xenobiological specimens. He immediately began setting up an IV line to provide the dragon with essential fluids and nutrients, while Sarah held the creature steady and monitored its vital signs. "This is remarkable," Webb said softly as he worked. "Dragons this young aren't supposed to be able to survive in these conditions for more than a few hours. This one's been here for weeks, maybe longer. Its will to live is extraordinary." Sarah found herself studying the baby dragon's face, noting the intelligence that was visible even in its unconscious state. Dragons were among the oldest spacefaring species in the galaxy, with a civilization that dated back millions of years. They were known for their wisdom, their technological prowess, and their fierce independence. To find one of their children abandoned on a death world was heartbreaking. "Can we move it?" Sarah asked. "Our shuttle's medical bay is much better equipped than anything we can do here." Webb nodded, carefully bundling the baby dragon in thermal regulation blankets while keeping its IV line secure. "It's stable enough for transport, but we need to be very careful. Any sudden temperature changes could send it into shock." The journey back to the shuttle was tense and difficult. Sarah and her team had to move slowly to avoid jostling their patient, while also racing against time as their environmental suit's power supplies began to show strain from the extreme conditions. By the time they reached the shuttle, all three humans were exhausted and running on auxiliary power. But they had succeeded. The baby dragon was alive, and for the first time in weeks, it was in an environment where it could actually recover. Once aboard the shuttle, Webb immediately transferred the dragon to their medical bay, a sophisticated chamber capable of providing life support for dozens of different species. The bay's computers analyzed the dragon's physiology and automatically adjusted the atmosphere composition, temperature, and humidity to optimal levels for dragon health. "Neural activity is increasing," Webb reported as he monitored the medical readings. "I think it's starting to wake up." Sarah stood beside the medical bay's viewing window, watching as the baby dragon's eyes slowly opened for the first time since its rescue. The creature's gaze was unfocused at first, but gradually sharpened as it took in its new surroundings. When its eyes met Sarah's through the transparent barrier, she saw something that surprised her. Not fear or confusion, but gratitude. The dragon's mouth opened slightly, and a sound emerged that was somewhere between a purr and a musical note. Despite their lack of a universal translator configured for dragon speech patterns, the meaning was clear. The creature was trying to say thank you. "Hello there, little one," Sarah said softly, pressing her palm against the viewing window. "You're safe now. We're going to take good care of you." The baby dragon slowly raised one tiny claw and pressed it against the window from the other side, matching the position of Sarah's hand. For a long moment, human and dragon regarded each other through the barrier, two representatives of different species sharing a moment of perfect understanding. Tors, who had been monitoring communications from the cockpit, suddenly called out with excitement. "Commander, I'm receiving a response to our rescue beacon. The Galactic Dragon Council has acknowledged our message and is dispatching a recovery ship. They'll be here within 6 standard hours." Sarah nodded, still looking at the baby dragon. "Good. Let them know their little friend is safe and recovering well." Over the next several hours, Webb continued treating the dragon's various ailments, while Sarah worked to establish basic communication. Dragons were telepathic to some degree, and the young creature was able to project simple concepts and emotions that Sarah could sense at the edge of her consciousness. From these fragmentary mental exchanges, Sarah learned that the baby dragon's name was Kaler, and that its mother had died defending it from poachers before crash landing on Pyrrhus 7. Kaler had been alone in the cave for nearly a month, slowly dying of thirst and starvation while hopping against hope that somehow rescue would come. "Your mother would be proud," Sarah told the dragon, who had progressed to eating small amounts of the synthesized nutrients Webb had prepared. "You never gave up, even when things seemed impossible. That takes real courage." Kaler's response was a complex mixture of sadness for its mother and gratitude for Sarah's kindness. The young dragon had never encountered humans before, but it seemed to instinctively understand that these strange aliens had risked their lives to save someone they had never met, simply because it was the right thing to do. When the Dragon Council's recovery ship finally arrived, Sarah felt genuinely sad to see Kaler go. The baby dragon had recovered much of its strength during the day they'd spent together, and its scales were already beginning to regain their natural luster. But more than that, Sarah had found herself genuinely caring about the little creature's well-being. The Dragon Council representatives who came aboard the shuttle were ancient beings, their scales worn smooth by countless centuries of life. They examined Kaler with tender care, speaking to the young dragon in the musical language of their species. When they learned what Sarah and her team had done, their gratitude was overwhelming. "The humans have honored themselves this day," the lead council member said in carefully pronounced Standard Galactic. "To risk death for a stranger's child shows the true character of your species. We will not forget this kindness." As the dragon ship prepared to depart, Kaler was brought to the viewing port one final time. The baby dragon looked directly at Sarah and projected a final message, one that came through clearly despite the barriers of language and species. The message was simple but profound. "I will remember you." And Sarah knew, as she watched the dragon ship disappear into the stellar void, that she would remember Kaler too. In a galaxy often divided by fear and mistrust between different species, they had shared something precious, proof that compassion could bridge any gap, and that sometimes the most important discoveries had nothing to do with minerals or planets or trade routes. Sometimes the most important discoveries were about what it meant to be truly alive. 5 years had passed since the rescue on Pyrrhus 7, and Commander Sarah Chen had almost convinced herself that her encounter with the baby dragon had been just another mission in her long career of planetary exploration. Almost. But late at night, when the stars wheeled overhead during her solitary watches, she still found herself wondering about Kaler. Had the young dragon grown strong and healthy? Was it thriving among its own kind? Did it ever think about the humans who had pulled it from the edge of death? Sarah was conducting a routine survey of the Kepler 442 system when her communications officer, now Lieutenant Commander Tors, received an unexpected transmission. The signal was coming from a Dragon Council diplomatic vessel that had apparently been waiting in the outer system, just beyond the range of their standard sensors. "They're requesting permission to board, Commander," Torres reported, unable to hide his excitement. "The transmission is specifically addressed to you by name." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. In 5 years of subsequent exploration missions, she had encountered dragons several times during diplomatic functions and trade negotiations. Each time, the ancient beings had treated her with unusual warmth and respect, but none of them had ever mentioned the rescue mission or given any indication of Kaler's fate. She had begun to assume that the young dragon had simply integrated into dragon society and moved on with its life. "Grant permission to dock," Sarah ordered, trying to keep her voice steady. "And Torres, clear the main conference room. I have a feeling this is going to be important." The Dragon Council ship was a work of art as much as a vessel of transportation. Its hull was formed from living metal that shifted and flowed like liquid mercury, constantly adapting to optimize the ship's performance. As it approached Sarah's survey vessel, the dragon ship seemed to dance through space, its movements graceful and purposeful in a way that human technology could barely approximate. The docking process was completed with typical dragon precision, and Sarah found herself standing in the main airlock as the massive portal opened. What she saw on the other side took her breath away. Kaler stood in the doorway, but this was not the tiny, dying creature she had rescued 5 years ago. The young dragon had grown into a magnificent being nearly 3 meters tall, with scales that gleamed like polished emeralds and eyes that held depths of intelligence and experience that seemed impossible for such a young creature. When Kaler saw Sarah, its face lit up with an expression of pure joy. "Sarah," Kaler said, its voice a rich musical tone that resonated through the ship's corridors. Dragons had learned human languages during the years since first contact, and Kaler spoke with only the slightest accent. "My friend, my savior, I have traveled so far to find you." Sarah found herself unable to speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the reunion. When she had last seen Kaler, the dragon had been a small, fragile creature that could barely lift its head. Now it stood before her as a being of power and grace, but somehow she could still see the scared youngster she had rescued in its eyes. "Kaler," Sarah finally managed to say, "look at you, you're magnificent." The dragon's response was a sound that was part laughter and part purr, a distinctly dragon expression of happiness. "I owe everything to you and your crew, but I did not come here simply to express gratitude. I came because I need your help once again, and because there are things you need to know about what happened on Pyrrhus 7. Sarah led Kaler to the conference room, where Dr. Webb was waiting with barely contained excitement. The doctor had followed the dragon's development through reports from the Dragon Council, but seeing Kaler in person was clearly a moment of professional triumph. The baby he had nursed back to health had grown into a healthy adult, proving that human medical techniques could successfully treat dragon physiology. "The council told me you've been studying human exploration techniques," Webb said as they settled into the conference room. "Something about learning to see the galaxy through human eyes." Kaler nodded, its expression growing more serious. "After my rescue, I became fascinated by human behavior. Why would a species risk everything to save a stranger? Why do humans explore places that offer nothing but death and danger? I have spent 5 years studying your people, trying to understand what drives you." "And what did you discover?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious about the dragon's perspective on humanity. "I discovered that humans possess something very rare in the galaxy," Kaler replied. "Most species, including my own, make decisions based on logic and long-term calculation. We help others when it serves our interests, explore new worlds when they offer resources or strategic value. But humans help because it is right, explore because it is possible. You act on compassion and curiosity without requiring justification." Sarah felt a flush of pride, but also skepticism. "I'm not sure we're as noble as you make us sound. Humans can be selfish and short-sighted too." "Of course," Kaler agreed, "but even your worst examples still possess that spark of irrational kindness. A human criminal will stop to help an injured animal. A human soldier will risk death to save an enemy's child. It is unique." The dragon paused, its expression shifting to something more troubled. "Which brings me to why I am here. 3 months ago, our long-range scouts discovered something on Pyrrhus 7. The planet is no longer dead, Sarah. It is inhabited." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Inhabited by whom?" "Humans," Kaler said quietly. "A colonial survey team landed there 6 weeks after our rescue. They found my mother's body and correctly determined that the cave system could be modified to support human habitation with the right technology. They have been there ever since, slowly transforming the planet into something livable. Tors, who had been listening quietly, suddenly looked up with alarm. "Commander, that's impossible. Pyrrhus 7 is still listed as a Class X death world. No colonial survey would be authorized for a planet like that." Kaler's expression grew even more troubled. "It was not an authorized survey, Lieutenant Commander. These humans are refugees, fleeing from something in the Outer Rim territories. They have no legal claim to the planet, no support from your government, and no backup if their life support systems fail." Sarah felt her mind racing. How many of them? "Approximately 200 adults and 50 children," Kaler replied. "They have managed to create a sustainable habitat using geothermal energy and atmospheric processors, but they are isolated and vulnerable. More importantly, they do not know what happened to my mother." "What do you mean?" Dr. Webb asked. Kaler was quiet for a long moment before answering. "My mother was carrying something when she died. Information about the location of a major dragon artifact cache hidden during the ancient wars. The poachers who were hunting her knew about this information, and they are still searching for it, if they discover that humans have colonized Pyrrhus 7. Sarah understood immediately. "They'll attack the colony to get access to your mother's remains." "Yes," Kaler confirmed. "And these humans have no defenses against the kind of weapons the poachers possess. They will be massacred, and they will never know why." The conference room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sarah found herself thinking about the brave colonists who had somehow managed to build a life on one of the galaxy's most hostile worlds, only to face destruction from a threat they couldn't possibly understand or prepare for. "What do you want from us?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "I want you to help me save them," Kaler said simply. "The Dragon Council cannot act directly without creating diplomatic incidents, but a human survey ship responding to a distress call, that would be perfectly legitimate." Tors looked skeptical. "We're a survey vessel, not a military ship. What can we do against professional poachers?" Kaler's expression shifted into what Sarah could only describe as a dragon smile, revealing teeth that could easily cut through steel plating. "Leave the poachers to me. I just need you to get the colonists to safety before the attack comes." Sarah felt the familiar rush of adrenaline that always came before a dangerous mission. This was exactly the kind of impossible situation that had defined her entire career, the sort of challenge that most people would run from, but that she couldn't resist. And this time, she wasn't just helping strangers. She was helping the friend who had become like family to her. "When do we leave?" she asked. "Immediately," Kaler replied. "Our intelligence suggests the poachers will reach Pyrrhus 7 within 10 days. That gives us very little time to evacuate 250 people from a planet that still wants to kill anyone who sets foot on it." Dr. Webb looked up from his tablet, where he had been calculating logistics. "Commander, our ship can't possibly evacuate that many people. We'd need at least 3 transport vessels to move a group that size." "Then we'll have to be creative," Sarah said, her mind already working through potential solutions. "Tors, get me a direct line to Fleet Command. I'm going to need to call in some favors." Over the next hour, Sarah worked her way through her contact list, speaking with old friends and former colleagues who owed her favors from previous missions. By the time she was finished, she had arranged for 2 additional transport ships to rendezvous with them at Pyrrhus 7, along with an escort of light cruisers that could provide protection during the evacuation. Kaler watched this process with obvious admiration. "This is exactly what I mean about human behavior," the dragon said. "You are risking your career and possibly your life to help people you have never met, based solely on my word that they are in danger." "That's what friends do," Sarah replied simply. "Besides, you risked everything to come warn us about this. The least I can do is help you follow through." The journey to Pyrrhus 7 took 4 days at maximum warp, with Kaler sharing everything he knew about the poacher threat and the colonial situation. The dragon had obviously done extensive research, providing detailed maps of the human settlement and intelligence reports about the criminal organization that was pursuing the artifact information. The poachers were led by a Vorthan named Scrix, a being known throughout the galaxy for his ruthlessness and his particular hatred of dragons. Scrix had been hunting Kaler's mother for over a year before the chase led to Pyrrhus 7, and he had never forgiven the dragons for the loss of his prey. Now he was bringing a small fleet of heavily armed ships to finish what he had started. Scrix does not simply kill for profit, Kaler explained as they approached the planet. He enjoys causing suffering, especially to those he considers inferior species. The human colonists will not die quickly if he captures them. Sarah felt her jaw tighten with anger. She had encountered criminals like Scrix before, beings who viewed other sentient life as mere objects to be exploited. The thought of such a creature getting his hands on innocent families filled her with cold determination. When they arrived at Pyrrha 7, Sarah was amazed by what the human colonists had accomplished. The planet's surface was still a hellscape of volcanic activity and poisonous gases, but the humans had managed to create a series of interconnected habitable zones using a combination of atmospheric processors, geothermal power plants, and environmental domes. From orbit, their settlement looked like a small city of glass and metal, glittering against the planet's dark surface. "Impressive," Kaler commented as they studied the settlement through the ship's sensors. "They have essentially created an artificial biosphere in one of the galaxy's most hostile environments. This level of engineering and determination is remarkable." Sarah opened communications with the colonial leadership, explaining the situation and the need for immediate evacuation. The response was exactly what she had expected from people tough enough to colonize a death world. Skepticism followed by practical questions about logistics and timing. "Commander Chen," said the colony's leader, a woman named Dr. Elizabeth Santos. "We appreciate your concern, but we've invested 5 years in building this settlement. We're not going to abandon it based on unsubstantiated rumors about some ancient alien treasure hunt." "Dr. Santos," Sarah replied patiently, "the individual warning us about this threat is the same dragon whose mother died on your planet. He has no reason to lie about the danger you're facing." There was a long pause before Santos replied. "You're telling me there's actually a dragon with you, that the bones we found in the deep caves belong to a sentient being?" Kaler stepped forward into the communication pickup's range. "Dr. Santos, my name is Kaler. My mother crash-landed on your world while fleeing from the poachers who killed her. I know this is difficult to accept, but your people are in mortal danger. Please trust us." The effect of seeing and hearing an actual dragon was immediate. Santos and her leadership team agreed to begin evacuation preparations, though they insisted on taking as much of their essential equipment and research as possible. The evacuation would be challenging, but it was doable. What they didn't know was that Scrix and his fleet had already arrived in the outer system. The first indication of trouble came when Sarah's sensor operator detected energy signatures consistent with cloaked ships moving through the asteroid belt beyond Pyrrha 7's outer moon. The poachers had arrived ahead of schedule, and they were already positioning themselves for an attack. "How long until our backup arrives?" Sarah asked Tors. 2 hours, he replied grimly. "The transport ships are pushing their engines to maximum, but they won't get here before the poachers make their move." Kaler studied the tactical display showing the approaching enemy ships. "Scrix has brought more vessels than our intelligence suggested, at least 6 heavy cruisers and a dozen smaller attack craft. He is not taking any chances this time." Sarah felt the familiar calm that always descended on her in moments of crisis. "Then we'll have to buy time for the evacuation ourselves. Tors, take us down to the planet's surface. We're going to set up a defensive perimeter around the colony." "Commander," Dr. Webb protested, "our ship isn't designed for atmospheric combat. We'll be sitting ducks if those cruisers attack us directly." "Maybe," Sarah replied, "but we're the only thing standing between those families and a very unpleasant death. Sometimes you have to make do with what you have." As their ship descended toward Pyrrha 7's surface, Kaler moved to stand beside Sarah's command chair. "My friend," the dragon said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever happens here, you have already done more than anyone could have asked. You saved my life, and now you are risking yours to save others. This is what I meant about human courage." Sarah looked at her dragon friend and smiled. "Kaler, I have a feeling this is going to be the start of a beautiful partnership. Are you ready to show these poachers what happens when they threaten innocent people?" Kaler's response was a low, musical note that somehow managed to convey both affection and anticipation for the coming battle. "Always, Sarah, always." As their ship settled into position above the human colony, Sarah Chen prepared to do what she had always done best. stand between danger and those who couldn't protect themselves, no matter what the cost. And this time, she wouldn't be standing alone. She would have a dragon at her side, fighting for the same principles that had brought them together in the first place. The battle for Pyrrhus 7 was about to begin, and Sarah Chen had never felt more ready for a fight in her entire life.